When a billionaire's anxious son melts down in a diner, a kind waitress steps in to help. What happens next changes all their lives forever. The day had started like any other for Emily Carter. She woke up before the sun, tied her hair into a messy ponytail, and quietly moved through the small apartment she shared with her mother and younger brother. The apartment was old. The wallpaper was peeling, and the heater made strange sounds in winter. But it was home. Her mother, once a cheerful woman, had grown weaker each year after a series of health problems. Her brother Max was still in high school and looked up to Emily more. Then he let on. Emily worked not just to pay rent and bills, but to keep her little family together. Every morning she walked 20 minutes to the corner diner where she worked. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small place with red booths, a counter full of pie slices and coffee that was always hot but never truly good. But people came anyway. They came for the quiet, for the comfort, and for the wait staff who made them feel human. Emily had been working there for 4 years. She knew the regulars by name, remembered how they liked their eggs, and smiled even. When her feet were aching by noon, that afternoon a heavy rain had begun falling outside. Gray clouds hung low over the city and people hurried in with wet coats and dripping umbrellas. Emily was refilling coffee cups and clearing dishes when the door swung open so hard it hit the wall behind it. A man stepped in, carrying a small boy in his arms. The man was tall, in a dark, expensive-looking coat, and his shoes were soaked from the puddles outside. But it was the boy that drew everyone's eyes. He was around 7 or 8 years old, with soft brown hair and a pale face twisted in distress. He clung tightly to the man's shirt, crying loudly, gasping between sobs. The sound echoed through the diner. Conversation stopped. A couple near the window glanced at each other nervously. An older man at the counter frowned and looked away. Some people just weren't comfortable around children who cried like that. The kind of crying that wasn't just about a scraped knee, but something deeper. Something overwhelming. The man, clearly flustered, looked around as if searching for a way to quiet his son or escape judgment, tried to soothe the boy, whispering something in his ear. But the child only cried harder, hiding his face against the man's chest. Emily didn't hesitate. She didn't roll her eyes like the new waitress behind the counter. She didn't pretend not to see like some of the other customers. She walked over, calm and steady, her apron still damp from washing dishes minutes ago. She crouched down beside them, her eyes level with the boy, even though he wasn't looking at her. "Hi there," she said gently. "I'm Emily. You're safe here, okay?" The man looked at her with surprise. Emily ignored him for the moment. Her full attention was on the boy. She noticed his hands were clenched tightly, his shoulders shaking. She didn't reach out to touch him. She knew better than that. Instead, she slowly sat down on the floor, cross-legged, beside them. At eye level, her voice softer than the rain tapping against the window. "I know it's a little loud in here," she continued in a calm, soothing tone. "And the lights are kind of bright. Sometimes that feels like too much, huh?" The boy peeked at her through tear-filled eyes, still clinging to his father, but slightly quieter now. Emily smiled. Not too big, just enough to show she wasn't a threat. "Would it help if I told you a secret?" she whispered. The boy blinked, breathing unevenly. Emily leaned in slightly and said, "Whenever I feel overwhelmed, I imagine I'm a turtle. I pull into my shell and pretend everything outside is just noise I don't need to hear. Want to try it with me?" She pulled her arms into her sleeves playfully, pretending to be a turtle. For a second, the boy stopped crying. He didn't laugh, but he watched her. Emily whispered again, "We can be turtles together for a minute. Quiet turtles. No one can bother us when we're in our shells." The boy took a shuddering breath and slowly, almost unwillingly, mimicked her. He pulled his arms in too. The diner was silent, everyone watching now. The man holding the boy looked stunned. Emily kept speaking quietly, her voice steady and calm. "Now we take 3 turtle breaths, slow ones, like this." She exaggerated a deep breath in and let it out slowly. The boy followed. Once, then twice, then a third time. After the third breath, The boy finally loosened his grip on his father's shirt. His shoulders relaxed. The crying had stopped. There were still tears on his face, but his eyes looked clearer now. Emily smiled again. "You did it," she whispered. "You're a really good turtle." The boy didn't speak, but he nodded slightly. Emily stood up carefully and looked at the man for the first time. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open. He looked down at his son, then at Emily, as if she were some kind of magician. "Is he okay now?" the man asked, his voice low. Emily nodded. "I think he just needed someone to see him." "Really see him?" The man cleared his throat and said, "Thank you. I didn't know what to do." "You're welcome," Emily replied, brushing her hands off on her apron. "Would you two like to sit at that booth over there? It's quieter, and I can dim the light above it." He nodded, still looking at her like he didn't quite understand what had just happened. He led the boy to the booth, and Emily gently guided them to the corner. She brought over a glass of water and a hot chocolate with extra whipped cream, placing it in front of the boy. No one in the diner said anything, but their glances said it all. A few looked away, ashamed of how they had judged the situation. A couple smiled quietly. Emily didn't care. She just cared that the boy was calm and safe after the rush had slowed down and the rain outside turned into a soft drizzle. The man called her over again. His tone was polite, but there was something serious in his eyes. "Thank you again," he said, reaching into his wallet. Emily raised her hand gently. "Please don't tip me for that." He paused. "You don't even know who I am, do you?" Emily smiled, a little puzzled. "Should I?" Looked amused. "Charles Renner." Emily blinked. The name sounded familiar. A moment passed, then it clicked. The Charles Renner. Tech entrepreneur, billionaire, owner of half the city's tallest buildings. He'd been on the cover of magazines and in headlines for years, but here in her diner, he was just a father with a scared little boy. "Oh," she said softly. "Well, I still don't want a tip." Charles studied her. "You have a way with him. Theo doesn't calm down for anyone. Not even me." Emily looked at the boy who was now sipping his hot chocolate slowly, his eyes watching the whipped cream melt. "He's just a kid," she said. "Sometimes the world is too loud for kids. They need someone who doesn't rush them." Charles leaned forward, his voice quieter now. "Have you worked with special needs children before?" Emily shook her head. "Not officially. My little brother Max is kind of like Theo. Different in some ways, but I learned how to listen, how to meet him. Where he is." There was a long silence between them. Something thoughtful passed through Charles's eyes. It wasn't just gratitude. It was curiosity. Maybe even something deeper. But before he could say more, a customer waved Emily over. She gave him a polite nod. "Excuse me, duty calls." Charles watched her walk away, still in that old apron. Smiling at the regulars, chatting with a toddler near the counter, clearing plates with practiced grace. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just was who she was, kind, calm, and full of something rare. He looked back at Theo, who was now doodling with the crayons Emily had brought over. The boy looked content, peaceful, for the first time. In a long while, Charles Renner didn't feel like he was drowning in confusion about how to help his son. And that feeling had come from a stranger with tired shoes and flour on her sleeves. He didn't know it yet. But this moment, this rainy afternoon in a quiet diner, would change all their lives forever. Charles Renner sat alone in his car that night, parked across from the small diner. Rain tapped gently on the windshield, and the soft hum of the engine was the only sound. Inside the diner, the lights were still on. Through the window, he could see the waitress, Emily, wiping down tables and laughing softly with the cook. It had been hours since she calmed his son Theo, in a way no one else ever had. But Charles was still thinking about it, as if the moment had left a crack in something hard and cold inside him. Charles wasn't used to feeling this way. He was a man who built a billion-dollar tech company from scratch, a man who solved problems with logic, speed, and money. He'd been featured on business magazines, invited to speak at global conferences, and had assistants handling everything from meetings to meals. But when it came to Theo, none of that seemed to matter. Didn't care about power or fame. He cared about quiet corners, soft voices, and someone who understood him. After his wife Lila died 3 years ago, everything fell apart. Lila had been the patient one, the one who understood Theo's moods, meltdowns, and silences. Ish had read every book, joined every support group, and fought for Theo at every school meeting. Charles, on the other hand, threw himself into work. He thought he could fix things by providing the best doctors, therapists, and special schools. But Theo didn't want more experts. He just wanted someone who listened. Now, for the first time in years, Charles had watched his son relax in front of someone else. Not because she was trained or experienced, but because she cared. She had spoken to Theo like he was a real person, not a project to solve or a case to manage. And that had done something Charles hadn't been able to do. In months, the next day, Charles returned to the diner. He wore a cap and sunglasses, trying not to draw attention. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he didn't want people to know that a billionaire had come back to a greasy spoon diner twice in 2 days. Or maybe he just didn't want Emily to treat him differently. He sat in the same booth, ordered black coffee, and waited. Emily noticed him right away. She raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised, but smiled as she walked over with her notepad. "Didn't expect to see you again," she said, pouring his coffee. "I wasn't sure I'd come either," Charles admitted. "But Theo, he asked if we could come back." That surprised her, he asked. Charles nodded. "He doesn't talk much, but this morning he said your name. Just one word, Emily. It was the first time he talked about anyone new in months." Emily didn't say anything for a moment. Then she sat down across from him, uninvited but confident. "Your son is amazing," she said. "He sees things most people don't, but I get the feeling not many people take the time to see him." Charles stirred his coffee, thinking, "I've spent so much money trying to help him. Therapists, special programs, schools that charge more than college, and nothing really worked. Then you, a waitress, sit down beside him and make it look easy." "It's not easy," Emily replied quietly. "But I don't think it's about money or programs. It's about making him feel safe. It's like he doesn't have to explain himself." Charles looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. She had tired eyes, but kind ones. Her nails were chipped from dishwashing, and her shoes had holes near the toe, but her presence, the way she carried herself, was steady and strong. "What's your story?" he asked, surprising even himself. "Why are you here? You don't seem like someone who belongs in a diner." Emily chuckled. "Well, thank you, I think. My mom got sick a few years ago. I dropped out of college to take care of her and my younger brother. This job keeps the lights on. Simple as that." Charles felt a tug in his chest. "That's a lot to carry." Emily shrugged. "We all carry something." After that, Charles began visiting the diner more often. Sometimes with Theo, sometimes alone. He started coming in at odd hours, early mornings, late afternoons, whenever he could steal time from his packed schedule. At first, the other staff whispered and stared. A billionaire in a cheap diner? It made no sense. But Emily treated him the same way she treated everyone, with quiet kindness and no pretense. Theo, too, started opening up, slowly, cautiously. He wouldn't speak full sentences, but he'd draw pictures for Emily, bring her little leaves he found outside, or gently tug her apron to show her something. Emily never pushed him. She always let him come to her. One afternoon, when the diner was nearly empty, Theo sat in a booth coloring while Charles drank his coffee. Emily slid into the booth across from Charles. "You know," she said, glancing at Theo, "he's really bright. He sees patterns before they happen. He remembers every detail." Charles nodded. Lila used to say that too. She called him her little genius. Emily smiled. "I see it." Charles hesitated, then asked, "Do you miss college, your old life?" "Thought about it. Sometimes I wanted to be a teacher. Maybe even a child therapist. But life had other plans." "What if," Charles said slowly, "you didn't have to choose? What if you could do both? Help your family and work with kids like Theo?" Emily tilted her head. That sounds like a dream. Charles leaned forward. What if I made you an offer? She raised her eyebrows. What kind of offer? Took a deep breath. Come work for me, full-time. As Theo's caregiver, or companion, or whatever term fits. You already understand him better than most professionals I've hired. I'll pay well. You can live at our estate, have weekends off, continue your studies online if you want. I'll cover the cost. Emily blinked. You're serious? Dead. Serious? She looked down, thinking it was a lot. Too much, maybe. She'd only known him a few weeks, but something in his voice told her this wasn't just about money. It was about hope. For Theo, for a better life. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, Charles said, take all the time you need. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat by her mother's bedside, listening to her slow, labored breathing. The medication was helping, but only just. Max had fallen asleep with a book on his chest. Emily looked around the tiny apartment, the cracked paint, the broken heater, the unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen counter. If she accepted the offer, she could finally help her family without killing herself with double shifts. But it also meant leaving them, moving into a world she didn't know, surrounded by people who might not understand her. She got up and sat on the balcony, letting the night air wash over her. In the distance, the city lights blinked like stars. She thought of Theo's quiet eyes, his little drawings. The way he had tugged her sleeve yesterday just to show her a paper airplane. He needed someone. And maybe for once, someone needed her. The next morning, Emily returned to the diner. Charles was already waiting, sipping coffee, his expression unreadable. She sat across from him. I'll do it, she said. Charles didn't smile right away. He studied her carefully, as if trying to see what she wasn't saying. Are you sure? He asked. Emily nodded. I need to take care of my family, and this is a chance I never thought I'd get. But more than that, I want to help Theo. I think I can. Charles finally smiled. A real one. You already are. 2 weeks later, Emily packed her things. Saying goodbye to the diner wasn't easy, the cook cried. One of the regulars gave her a crocheted blanket. Even the grumpy manager offered her a stiff hug. Emily promised to visit. When the black car pulled up outside her building, Max gave her a long hug. Her mother, weak but smiling, said, You're going to change lives, Em? Just like you always have. As the car drove toward the Renner estate, Emily looked out the window at the changing city. She didn't know what waited for her on the other side of this new life, but she felt ready. Nervous, yes, but ready. Because sometimes life takes strange turns. And sometimes the people you help end up helping you right back and deep in her heart. Emily knew this was just the beginning. The sky was soft blue with light clouds drifting lazily above the trees as Emily stepped onto the large driveway of the Renner estate. It was the first morning of her new job, and everything around her felt different, shiny, quiet, and impossibly clean. The gates had opened automatically as the car drove in, and now she stood in front of a house so big it looked like a hotel. Her hands were a little shaky as she clutched her bag tighter. She had never been in a place like this before. The lawn was trimmed so perfectly that it looked like a green carpet. The walls of the house were tall and smooth, with windows that stretched almost from floor to ceiling. A woman in a black uniform opened the front door and nodded politely, then led her inside without saying much. Emily stepped into a world of white marble floors, sparkling glass, and quiet whispers. The air smelled like fresh linen and expensive soap. Everything looked too clean to touch. She felt like she had walked into a magazine. A few minutes later, Charles walked down a long hallway toward her. He looked different than she remembered from the diner, more serious, maybe a bit tired. But there was warmth in his eyes. You're here, he said with a small smile. I am, Emily replied, trying not to show how nervous she was. Let's talk for a bit, Charles said, motioning for her to follow him. Theo's upstairs with his therapist, but I wanted a moment with you first. They walked through the wide hallway into a sitting room that overlooked a garden full of roses. Charles gestured for her to sit on one of the white couches. Emily did, carefully. I'm sure if she was even allowed to sit on something so soft. Charles sat across from her and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. I know this is a big change for you, he began. I didn't just want to offer you a job because Theo likes you. I wanted to tell you why this matters so much to me. Emily sat quietly nodding. My wife Leela passed away 3 years ago, he said, his voice lower now. She was Theo's favorite person in the world. She was patient, loving, and understood him better than I ever could. When she got sick, everything started falling apart. After she died, Theo shut down. He wouldn't talk, wouldn't eat properly, wouldn't sleep through the night. I tried everything. Doctors, specialists, schools, but nothing helped. Emily looked at him gently. She could see the pain in his eyes, even though his voice stayed calm. I threw money at the problem, Charles continued, because that's all I knew how to do. I built companies, fixed failing businesses, negotiated billion-dollar deals, but I couldn't fix my son, and that broke me. Emily swallowed hard, her chest tightening a little. Then, that day in the diner, I watched you kneel beside him and speak to him like he wasn't broken. You didn't flinch when he screamed. You didn't panic when he cried. You just connected with him, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She smiled softly. I didn't do anything magical. I just tried to see him, but no one else does, Charles said, his voice stronger now. You did. That's why I asked you to come here, not just to take care of him, but to be someone he can trust. Someone who doesn't treat him like a problem. Emily felt a mix of emotions, Asians, and a strange kind of hope. She looked at Charles seriously. I can't promise perfection, she said, but I can promise patience and love, and that I'll try my very best. All I want, Charles replied. Thank you. Just then, a small voice called out from the hallway, Emily? Emily turned and saw Theo standing near the door, clutching a toy dinosaur in one hand. His hair was slightly messy, and he was wearing socks that didn't match. But his face lit up when he saw her. Emily smiled and opened her arms slightly. Hey, buddy. He walked over and handed her the dinosaur like it was a gift. She took it with care, pretending to study it seriously. This is a fine dinosaur, she said. What should we name him? Theo thought for a moment and whispered, Pickles. Emily laughed. Perfect. Pickles the dinosaur. I love it. Charles watched silently, his heart full. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel so heavy. Over the next few days, Emily adjusted to life in the Renner estate. It wasn't easy. Everything was new routines, new people, and new rules. The staff didn't quite know what to make of her. Some were friendly. Others watched her with quiet suspicion. She could sense that some thought she didn't belong there. Girl from a diner walking around a billionaire's mansion like she was part of the family. But Emily didn't let it bother her. She focused on Theo. She quickly learned that he had his own way of seeing the world. He didn't like loud noises or unexpected changes. He hated buttons on his shirts and only liked one kind of juice. He lined up his crayons in a perfect row before coloring, and he didn't like people touching his toys unless he offered them first. Emily respected all of it. She never pushed him, never forced eye contact, and always gave him time to process things. Slowly, Theo began to let her into his world. One afternoon, while they were sitting in the garden, Theo reached for her hand, without saying anything. He just held it gently for a moment before going back to drawing. Emily didn't say a word, but her heart was full. Charles started spending more time at home, quietly observing the way Emily and Theo connected. He noticed how Theo would look for Emily when he was anxious, how he would mimic her breathing techniques when things got overwhelming. There were fewer meltdowns, more smiles, more quiet moments of peace, and Charles found himself drawn to Emily, too, not just because of how she helped Theo, but because of who she was. She didn't treat Charles like a billionaire. She didn't care about his fame or money. She teased him when he forgot to eat lunch and scolded him gently when he spent too long on his laptop. She laughed at his dry jokes, and he found himself looking forward to their conversations. One evening, after Theo had gone to bed, Charles invited Emily to the patio, where a soft breeze was blowing. They sat with cups of tea, watching the stars. "You've changed this place," he said softly. Emily looked surprised. Me, Charles nodded. "It used to feel so cold, so quiet, but now it feels alive again." "Tea, that's Theo. When he's happy, everything feels lighter." Charles turned to her, his voice lower now. "It's you too." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, the kind that felt safe. But even with all the good things, there were still hard days. Sometimes Theo would have a rough night, or wake up screaming, and Emily would sit by his bed humming softly until he calmed down. Sometimes he'd refuse to eat, or speak for hours. But Emily never lost patience. She always stayed calm, always tried again. One day the head housekeeper, stern woman named Mrs. Keller, cornered Emily in the hallway. "You're doing well with the boy," she said flatly, "but don't get too comfortable. This world isn't meant for people like us." Emily stared at her. "I'm not here for the world. I'm here for Theo." Mrs. Keller didn't respond, but for the first time, she gave a small nod before walking away. Despite the challenges, Emily stayed strong. She called her mother every night, sent money home each week, and reminded herself why she was doing this. And every time Theo whispered her name, or reached for her hand, or showed her one of his carefully drawn pictures, she knew it was worth it. One night after a particularly difficult day, Charles asked Emily to join him in the study. She expected him to talk about Theo's schedule or some upcoming appointment. But instead, he sat across from her and looked unusually serious. "Want to tell you something personal?" he said. Emily nodded. "'Kay, I've been alone for a long time," he said. "Even when Leela was alive, I was buried in work. I thought success would protect me from pain. But then she got sick, and I couldn't save her. And after she died, I felt useless, especially as a father." Emily's heart ached for him. "You're not useless, Charles. You're trying every day." "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. "But when I see you with Theo, I feel hope. Not just for him, but for me too." She felt something stir in her chest, a warmth, a deep respect, something more than friendship but too delicate to name. "I want you to stay," Charles said softly. "Not just for the job, because this house is better with you in it." Emily looked at him, her eyes wide. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything now," he replied. "Just think about it." As she walked back to her room that night, Emily felt her heart racing. Something was changing, not just in Theo, not just in the house, but in her. She had come here to help a child, but in doing so, she had found something unexpected, a place where she was needed, respected, and maybe, just maybe, loved. And even though the path ahead was still uncertain, Emily felt ready to walk it. Because sometimes the most powerful moments begin with a quiet connection and lead to something beautiful that no one ever saw coming. The sun shone brightly across the wide lawns of the Renner estate, and the air smelled fresh after a night of rain. Birds chirped softly in the trees as Emily walked hand in hand with Theo. It had been almost 2 months since she had moved in, and every day brought new lessons, small victories, and fresh challenges. While she was slowly adjusting to her new life, it was far from easy. Living in a billionaire's mansion felt like stepping into a different world. Every morning began in a room bigger than her entire apartment back home. Fresh flowers appeared in a vase by her window, and her closet now held clothes she hadn't picked herself. Staff quietly moved through the halls, always polite, but often distant. Emily often felt like an outsider, someone who didn't quite belong. But then there was Theo, and with him, she never felt out of place. Their bond had grown deeper with each passing day. Theo had started to open up in ways even Charles hadn't seen before. He would now speak in full sentences, sometimes even tell small stories about his dreams or things he imagined. His laughter, once rare and short, had become a sweet sound that filled the halls. He trusted Emily completely, and that trust gave her strength to deal with everything else. But there were difficult moments too. Theo still had bad days. Some mornings, He refused to get out of bed. On others, loud noises from outside would upset him so badly he would hide under the table for hours. One afternoon, a door slammed during a thunderstorm, and Theo started shaking uncontrollably. Emily had held him close, rocking gently back and forth until he felt safe again. Those were the times. Emily felt the weight of it all. She was only human. There were nights she cried quietly into her pillow, missing her mother's warm voice and her brother's silly jokes. She worried about their bills back home, about whether Max was eating properly or her mother was taking her medicine. Charles had offered help many times, sending a nurse to check on her mom. Hiring a tutor for Max, but Emily had always hesitated. She didn't want to feel like she owed anything more than she already did. Still, Charles never stopped offering kindness. He made time to talk to her every few evenings. He listened carefully, asked about her family, and shared stories of his own childhood, his early days in business, and the loneliness he had felt after losing his wife. Emily began to understand him better, not as a billionaire, but as a man flawed, tired, is trying his best. One evening, while Theo was drawing in the corner, Charles and Emily sat in the library, surrounded by shelves full of thick books and soft lighting. "You've become a part of this family," Charles said quietly, looking at her over the rim of his glass. Emily looked down, unsure how to answer. He added, "Not just to Theo, to me, too." There was a long pause, and the room felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. Emily's heart beat faster, not because she was afraid, but because deep down, she knew she had started to care about Charles more than she had expected. His words touched something tender inside her, but they also scared her. She had never imagined falling for someone like Charles. Their worlds were so different. He lived in suits and board meetings. She came from broken heaters and secondhand shoes. But love doesn't always ask permission. It creeps in quietly, in shared laughter, in long conversations, and in the way two people begin to understand each other. But just as things seemed to settle into something warm and hopeful, everything changed. One morning, Emily received a phone call from her neighbor back home. Her mother had collapsed in the kitchen and was rushed to the hospital. Her brother was with her, but he was scared and unsure of what to do. Emily's heart dropped. She didn't even wait to pack properly. She just ran to Charles's office, breathless and panicked. "My mom's in the hospital," she said, trying to stay calm but trembling. "I need to go home." Charles stood up immediately. "Of course. I'll have the car ready." He arranged everything in minutes: driver, luggage, and even a private doctor who would check on her mother once she got there. Emily could hardly speak through the tears. Before she left, she hugged Theo tightly, telling him she would be back soon. But when she got home, things weren't as simple as she'd hoped. Her mother had suffered a mild stroke. The doctor said she'd recover, but it would take time, weeks of rest, medicine, and therapy. Max had done his best to take care of everything, but he was still just a teenager. Their fridge was nearly empty, the bills were unpaid, and the apartment smelled faintly of damp walls and old medicine. Emily rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She cleaned, cooked, ran errands, and helped her mom with every little thing. She didn't sleep much, and for the first few nights, she didn't even check her phone. But when she finally did, there were missed calls and messages from Charles. Short, kind notes. "How's she doing? Need anything? We miss you." Theo had sent her a photo of a drawing. It showed a girl holding hands with a boy standing in a field of stars. In the corner, he had written her name in his shaky handwriting. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Days turned into weeks, and Emily began to feel pulled in two directions. Her heart was with her family, but another part of her missed Theo terribly. She missed his quiet humor, his little dinosaur facts, the way he'd sit beside her and hum when he felt safe. And yes, she missed Charles Tooth, a man who always asked if she was okay, even when he didn't say it out loud. One evening, while folding laundry, Max sat beside her on the bed. "You should go back," he said. Emily looked at him, surprised. "What? You miss them?" he said simply. "And you've done everything you can here. I've got this." "You're just a kid," she said, half smiling. Max shook his head. "I'm not a kid anymore, Mem, and you taught me how to be strong." Let me take care of Mom for a while. Emily sat in silence, staring at her brother. She had never been prouder of him. Later that night, Charles called. "How's everything?" he asked, his voice soft. "She's stable," Emily replied. "Getting better, but I've missed you. And Theo." There was a pause, and he said, "He's been waiting at the gate every afternoon. He thinks she'll just appear again." Emily closed her eyes, tears escaping without her realizing. "I didn't think it would be this hard." "Come home," Charles said gently. Emily froze. "Is it still home?" "It is," he replied, "if you want it to be." The next morning, Emily packed her bag. She kissed her mother's forehead and hugged Max tightly. He didn't say anything, just smiled and waved as she stepped into the car that Charles had sent. When she arrived back at the estate, it was late evening. The sky was golden with the setting sun, and the trees swayed in a gentle breeze. As soon as the car stopped, Theo ran out of the house and into her arms, almost knocking her over. He didn't say a word, just held her tightly. Charles stepped out behind him, watching quietly. Emily looked at him, her heart full. "I'm sorry I left so suddenly," she said. "You don't have to be sorry," he replied. "You did what was right." "I didn't know if I still belonged here." Charles stepped closer. "This place isn't the same without you, and neither am I." They stood there for a long time, not speaking, letting the moment speak for them. Later, that night, after Theo was asleep and the house had grown quiet, Charles and Emily sat by the fireplace. The warmth of the flames glowed softly between them. "I've been thinking," Charles said, "about everything." Emily looked at him. "Waiting. I don't want to lose you again," he said. "Not as Theo's caregiver, not as someone I—" He stopped himself, unsure if he should say more. Emily reached for his hand. "I don't want to go anywhere either." Their hands stayed joined, quiet and steady, like two puzzle pieces that had finally found each other. That night, Emily went to sleep with peace in her heart. She still didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. And for the first time in a long time, she felt not like a visitor, but like someone who belonged. Time had passed, and the Renner estate had slowly started to feel less like a huge empty mansion and more like a home. Emily had become a part of that house, part of that family. The journey had not been easy. There were many hard days, many tears and moments of doubt, but it was also full of hope, small victories, and unexpected joys. The little boy who once trembled at loud noises and hid when things became too much had changed in ways no one could have imagined. Were brighter now, his smile more frequent, and his laughter, a sound that used to be so rare, was often heard echoing through the halls. Emily had been there every step of the way, patient and kind, never rushing.
Always listening.
Charles watched all of this with a deep sense of gratitude and admiration. He was a man used to power and control in his business world, but with his son and Emily, he had learned to let go and simply be present. Watching them together made him believe again in love, in healing, in second chances. But even with all the progress, life had its way of testing their strength. One chilly autumn morning, Emily woke up to find a letter on her bedside table. The envelope was simple, without a return address. She opened it carefully and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was from her mother's doctor. The news was not what she had hoped for. Her mother's health had taken a sudden turn for the worse. There was a new complication, and the doctors recommended immediate surgery. It was risky, but without it, her mother's condition could rapidly decline. Emily's heart sank. She felt torn between two worlds, her family and the city who needed her, and the Renner estate where she had found a place that was starting to feel like home. She showed the letter to Charles over breakfast. His face grew serious, but his eyes held a calm determination. "We'll go together," he said firmly. "You're not alone in this." For the first time, Emily felt the full weight of what it meant to be truly supported, not just by a job or a paycheck, but by someone who cared deeply. They left that same day for the city hospital. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air as Emily sat beside her mother's bed, holding her frail hand. Her mother smiled weakly. but her eyes were filled with trust and love. Max was there too, strong and brave. But Emily could see the worry behind his steady expression. The surgery was long and tense. Emily paced the waiting room, heart pounding with every minute. Charles stayed by her side, silent but steady, occasionally offering words of comfort that helped soothe her fears. When the doctors finally came out, their faces told the story before their words did. The surgery was successful, but recovery would be slow and fragile. Emily felt relief flutter like a wave. She thanked the doctors and sat down beside Charles, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "It's going to be okay," Charles said gently. Over the next few weeks, Emily balanced her time between the hospital and the estate. She made sure her mother had the best care, while also keeping Theo's world as stable and loving as possible. Theo, ever perceptive, noticed her fatigue. One afternoon, while sitting in the garden, he reached out and took her hand. "You tired, Emily?" he asked softly. She smiled despite herself. "A little." Theo thought for a moment. "Rest with me." He laid his head on her lap, and she closed her eyes, letting the quiet comfort wash over her. It was moments like this, small, silent, and full of love, that reminded Emily why she had come so far. Back at the estate, Charles had grown closer to Emily, not just as an employer, but as a partner. They shared long talks about hopes and fears, dreams and regrets. The walls Charles had built around his heart after losing Lila were slowly breaking down, brick by brick. One evening, under a sky full of stars, Charles took Emily's hand and looked into her eyes. "I want to be honest with you," he said softly. "You mean more to me than I ever expected, not just for Theo, but for me." Emily's heart raced. She had felt this growing between them for some time, but hearing it out loud made it real. "I feel the same," she whispered. They didn't rush anything. There was no grand declaration or sweeping moment. Instead, their connection grew naturally, like a plant slowly reaching toward the sun, steady and sure. Life at the Renner estate changed in other ways too. Charles decided to slow down his work, spending more time at home and with his son. Even began volunteering at a charity for children with special needs. Inspired by his journey with Theo and Emily, Emily continued her work with Theo, helping him explore the world at his own pace. She celebrated every small step, every new word, every new friend, every new adventure. But the biggest change was inside Theo. He had learned to trust the world again, not just tolerate it. He found joy in small things, a gentle breeze, a bird's song, a new book to read. One afternoon, Emily and Theo sat by the lake on the estate grounds, throwing pebbles into the water. Theo looked up at her and smiled a real bright smile. "Emily," he said, "thank you." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Theo, for trusting me." Charles watched from a distance, feeling his heart swell with pride. The years that followed brought challenges, as life always does. But with Emily and Charles working together, they faced them with courage and love. One day, after many months of planning, Charles surprised Emily with a small party in the garden. Close friends and family gathered, laughter filled the air, and Theo ran around with other children, his joy infectious. Charles took Emily's hand and led her to the center of the crowd. "Emily," he said, his voice clear and warm, "you came into our lives when we needed you most. You've given Theo hope, laughter, and love. And you've given me a second chance." He dropped to one knee and pulled out a small box. "Will you marry me?" Emily's eyes filled with tears of happiness, relief, and a deep, overwhelming love. "Yes," she whispered. The crowd cheered, and Theo ran up to hug her, shouting, "Mommy! Mommy!" It was a perfect moment. A moment where broken pieces had been put back together, where love had healed wounds, where hope had been reborn. As they began their life together, Emily and Charles knew that challenges would come. They also knew they would face them side by side, because sometimes the most unlikely people can change each other's worlds in the most beautiful ways. And sometimes love isn't about grand gestures or perfect plans. It's about showing up, being patient, and believing in the power of connection. Emily had come to the Renner estate as a waitress from a diner. But she stayed because she had found a family, a home, and a love she never dreamed possible. As she looked at Charles and Theo, smiling and happy beside her, she knew that this was just the beginning of their story, a story of hope, courage, and the magic of second chances. Let me know if you want me to continue with anything else.